The woman convicted of murdering Mexican-American music star Selena has been denied parole.
I was hurting. My body was hurting. I didn't know how to operate a gun. I've never had one.
He's currently serving a life sentence for the 1995 killing that shocked the music world.
For almost 30 years, the tragic end of Selena Quintanilla was believed to be fully understood and left in the past. But newly surfaced evidence is now forcing a different conversation, one that challenges everything fans thought they knew, and it's far from comforting. Recent revelations connected to those closest to her, including Chris Pérez, are bringing long, silent details back into the light.
Yolanda didn't, of course, at first started working with Selena as a personal assistant and then managing the boutique. We started closing everything up around her.
And what's emerging now suggests the truth may have been far more complex than ever revealed. New revelations about Selena that no one expected. For years, Chris Pérez stayed mostly silent when it came to Selena Quintanilla, choosing to keep their private life locked away from public attention. Even as fans continued to celebrate her legacy, he remained in the background, rarely speaking about what life was really like behind the fame. But in 2025, that silence finally broke. In a deeply emotional interview connected to a new docuseries, Chris opened up in a way he never had before. This wasn't the usual polished retelling of Selena's rise to stardom. It was raw, unfiltered, and at times painfully honest. And what he revealed is now forcing people to rethink everything they thought they knew about her life. According to Chris, Selena wasn't just the bright, unstoppable force the world saw on stage. Behind the performances and the smiles was someone carrying a weight that few people ever noticed. He described moments where she felt overwhelmed, not by fame itself, but by everything it demanded from her. Expectations were everywhere, and it often felt like there was no space left for her to simply exist as herself. The image of Selena y los Dinos was powerful and successful, but Chris hinted that it also came with invisible pressure. Selena, he explained, sometimes felt trapped in a role that was already written for her long before she had the chance to define who she wanted to become. And quietly, she began questioning it. In the months leading up to her death, Chris recalled conversations where Selena expressed a growing desire for something more personal. Something that didn't revolve entirely around the family business or the expectations tied to it. She wasn't rejecting her roots, but she wanted to understand who she was beyond the stage name the world had already embraced. That inner conflict slowly turned into tension, especially within the family structure that managed her career. There was love, of course, but also unspoken disagreements about direction, control, and independence. And Selena found herself caught in between. Chris also spoke about her private creative world, the notebooks filled with ideas, unfinished lyrics, and visions of a future that extended far beyond what she was currently doing. She wasn't just thinking about music, she was imagining fashion, acting, producing, and building something that belonged entirely to her. It was ambition on a level few people ever saw. But with every step forward she wanted to take, there were limits pulling her back. And then came the part of Chris's account that left many shaken. He described moments no audience ever witnessed. After the shows ended and the lights went out, Selena wasn't always the confident star people saw in public. There were nights when she broke down emotionally, overwhelmed by pressure she carried silently for so long. The expectations of her family, her career, and her fans didn't just surround her, they followed her everywhere. Chris remembered how quickly things could change. One moment she would be smiling, laughing, interacting with fans, and the next, behind closed doors, she would fall into silence and tears. It was a side of her life the world was never meant to see. And just when it seems like the full picture of her struggles is beginning to form, another layer begins to emerge. One that goes beyond pressure and fame and into something far more complicated. Because behind Selena's emotional battles and growing independence, there was also a powerful force shaping nearly every decision she made. And that influence would eventually lead her life into a direction she never expected. And that's where the story takes a darker turn, into the dynamics of power, control, and silence that shaped everything that came next. Was Selena truly free? The untold truth behind her career. Selena Quintanilla's story was never shaped by fame alone. Behind the bright lights, chart-topping success, and adoring crowds was a complex web of love, control, ambition, and sacrifice that influenced almost every step she took. To the public, she was a rising global star. But behind the scenes, her journey was carefully guided. Some would say tightly controlled by the person who first discovered her talent, her father, Abraham Quintanilla.
Tonight, Latin music fans are mourning the passing of Abraham Quintanilla Jr., the father of late Tejano superstar Selena.
From the moment he recognized her voice at a young age, Abraham didn't just support her dream. He built an entire structure around it. What started as a family project slowly turned into a fully managed career system where he held the final say in nearly everything. Selena wasn't just a daughter pursuing music. She became the center of a business that revolved around her image, her voice, and her potential. Even her artistic direction wasn't entirely her own. Although she grew up speaking English, Abraham encouraged, and at times insisted, that she perform in Spanish, believing it was essential to connect with the Latino market that would define her success. That decision worked in their favor, helping Selena y Los Dinos grow from small local performances into one of the most recognized names in Tejano music by the late 1980s. But success came with a cost that wasn't immediately visible. As Selena's popularity increased, so did her internal struggle for independence. She wasn't just becoming a performer, she was becoming a brand carefully shaped by family expectations. And slowly, she began to question how much of her life truly belonged to her. That tension became even more visible when love entered the picture. Her relationship with guitarist Chris Pérez wasn't just a private romance, it became a point of conflict within the family structure. When Abraham discovered their relationship, he saw it as a threat to the stability of everything they had built. Chris was removed from the band without hesitation, and the message was clear. Personal choices that disrupted the system would not be tolerated. Abraham reportedly feared that marriage could shift Selena's focus away from her career entirely. At one point, he even dismissed her feelings, framing Chris's affection as something influenced by fame rather than genuine emotion. It was a painful moment that highlighted the growing gap between Selena's personal desires and her father's vision for her future. Despite the tension, Selena and Chris eventually chose to follow their own path, marrying in 1992. But even that decision didn't fully free her from the structure surrounding her life. She remained deeply tied to the family's professional system, where financial decisions, career direction, and creative control were still closely managed within the same framework her father had built. At the same time, Selena was trying to expand her identity beyond music. She stepped into fashion with her boutiques, exploring a side of herself that wasn't limited to the stage. But without full independence in business decisions, her control over her own ventures remained restricted. Even as her influence grew, her autonomy did not fully follow. Every move she made, whether in music, fashion, or personal life, still existed within boundaries that were already established long before she had the chance to define her own limits. And yet, what made this even more complicated was how deeply personal everything remained. This wasn't just about control in a professional sense. It was about family, loyalty, and emotional ties that made walking away nearly impossible. Because behind every decision was not just a manager, but a father. And behind every disagreement was a bond that couldn't easily be broken. But as pressure built from all sides, family expectations, career demands, and personal struggles, an entirely different dynamic began forming in the background. One that didn't come from within the family, but from someone who appeared to be close, loyal, and trusted. And that presence would slowly shift from admiration to something far more dangerous, setting the stage for a betrayal no one saw coming. The woman behind Selena's death. How trust turned into betrayal. At the center of Selena Quintanilla's tragic story is a relationship that, on the surface, looked harmless, almost even beneficial. But underneath that trust was a slow-building danger that no one in her world fully recognized until it was far too late. That danger came in the form of Yolanda Saldivar. To the outside world, Yolanda appeared like a devoted supporter. She presented herself as someone deeply passionate about Selena's success, someone who simply wanted to help and be part of the movement. In the beginning, there was nothing alarming about her presence. In fact, she seemed useful, organized, enthusiastic, and willing to take initiative in ways that made her stand out. Her connection to Selena's world began in 1991, when she reached out with an idea that initially felt harmless, creating a fan club dedicated to Selena Quintanilla. At the time, it looked like a positive step. A registered nurse from San Antonio, she positioned herself as a responsible adult who genuinely admired Selena's work and wanted to support her career in a meaningful way. And, for a while, it worked exactly as intended. The fan club grew rapidly, eventually reaching over 1,500 members. Yolanda's involvement deepened, and so did the trust placed in her. She wasn't just managing fans anymore, she was slowly being moved closer to Selena's professional and personal circle. What started as coordination soon turned into access. She was eventually entrusted with managing Selena's boutiques, handling financial responsibilities, and even gaining access to sensitive personal spaces, including Selena's home. From an outside perspective, this level of trust seemed like a natural extension of loyalty. After all, she was always present, always willing, always available. But trust can sometimes blur the line between dedication and dependency. Not everyone, however, felt comfortable with Yolanda's growing influence. Some individuals within Selena's professional circle began noticing behaviors that raised quiet concerns. Among them was fashion designer Martin Gomez, who worked closely with Selena during her boutique projects. He later described Yolanda's behavior as increasingly controlling, even possessive. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It felt like ownership. According to accounts, Yolanda would interfere in professional relationships, create tension between staff members, and position herself in ways that made it difficult for others to stay close to Selena. Over time, discomfort began to spread among those who worked with her. Something about the dynamic felt off, but it was difficult to fully articulate at first. Still, concerns continued to build. Martin Gomez eventually decided to step away from his role, and before leaving, he reportedly gave Selena a warning. Short, simple, but unsettling in hindsight. Be careful. At the time, it may have seemed like cautionary advice rooted in workplace tension, but looking back, it reads like something far more serious. As months passed, the situation escalated quietly behind the scenes. Financial inconsistencies began surfacing. Complaints were raised by employees who noticed missing payments and unresolved transactions. Fans who had paid membership fees through the fan club reported not receiving the benefits they were promised. These weren't isolated incidents. They formed a pattern. Eventually, Abraham Quintanilla began investigating the irregularities more closely. What he discovered confirmed the growing suspicions. Funds had been mismanaged and, in some cases, directly taken. The total amount involved reportedly exceeded $60,000. The realization was devastating. Someone who had been given extraordinary access and trust was now being accused of betrayal on a financial level. For the family, it wasn't just about money. It was about violation of trust at the deepest level. Yolanda was immediately confronted, and the decision was made to remove her from her position. But even after being fired, the situation did not simply end. Selena, known for her empathetic nature and desire to resolve conflicts peacefully, continued to maintain contact with Yolanda. There were unresolved matters, including important financial documents that still needed to be retrieved. Selena's approach was practical. She wanted closure, not confrontation. But this decision would become one of the most debated points in her story. Because while Selena saw it as finalizing loose ends, the situation had already shifted into something far more unstable. The trust that once existed had already been broken on multiple levels, even if she still hoped things could be resolved calmly. Behind the scenes, however, a very different reality was unfolding. Yolanda's access was gone. Her role had been terminated, but emotionally and psychologically, the situation had not fully detached. And as tensions escalated, what once seemed like a controlled business dispute began turning into something far more dangerous and unpredictable. On March 13, 1995, Yolanda purchased a .38 caliber revolver. That single detail changes the tone of everything that followed. What had started as trust, admiration, and proximity was now shifting into something irreversible. Over the following weeks, attempts to delay, deflect, and stall communication only added more uncertainty to an already fragile situation. Until finally, a meeting was arranged, a final conversation meant to settle everything once and for all. It was scheduled for March 31st at a motel in Corpus Christi. And that meeting, what was expected to be a resolution, would instead become the moment that shattered everything, not just for Selena's family, but for millions of people who never saw what was coming. Because inside that room, something would happen that no one could undo. And the aftermath would change the way the world remembers her forever. And what followed that moment didn't just end a life. It ignited a global reaction that continues to divide opinions, raise questions, and fuel debates even decades later, leading directly into how the media and public memory reshaped Selena's legacy in ways no one could have controlled. Inside the ongoing war over Selena's memory, the moment Selena Quintanilla passed in 1995, her story didn't end. It changed form. What was once a rising, living legacy immediately transformed into something the world began to interpret, reshape, and claim. And almost instantly, her life became a subject of public storytelling, debate, and emotional ownership. Not long after her death, conversations in Hollywood began circulating about turning her life into a film. For her family, still in the middle of shock and grief, this created an impossible situation. They weren't ready to revisit her story, let alone see it reconstructed for entertainment. But the pressure was already building behind the scenes. Selena's sister, Suzette Quintanilla, later revealed that the family felt pushed into a corner. According to her, there were already early movements in Hollywood to produce a biographical film, even before they had fully processed their loss. Faced with that reality, they made a difficult decision: to take control of the narrative themselves. That decision led to the 1997 biopic starring Jennifer Lopez. For many fans, the film became a defining portrayal of Selena. It introduced her story to a global audience and helped solidify her image as a cultural icon. But, at the same time, it also raised a deeper question that continues to follow her legacy. How much of a real person can survive once their life is turned into a script? Because every adaptation requires selection. Every retelling chooses what to highlight and what to leave out. Years later, the debate continued when Netflix released Selena, the series. The project was officially supported by the Quintanilla family, with A.B. Quintanilla defending it as a respectful and authentic portrayal. He even suggested that Selena herself would have appreciated seeing her story told in that format. But not everyone agreed. Some critics and viewers felt the series leaned too heavily on the family's perspective, especially the business and management side of her life. Instead of focusing on Selena's internal world, her personality, her emotions, her private identity, the story, in their view, often circled around those who surrounded her. This sparked a larger conversation. When a family is deeply involved in shaping a biographical project, does it enhance authenticity or limit it? At the same time, another controversy emerged that reignited public anger in a very different way. A documentary project that included the voice and perspective of Yolanda Saldivar, Selena's killer, was released. For many fans, this crossed a line that should never have been approached. Giving narrative space to the person responsible for Selena's death felt, to some, like reopening a wound that had never truly healed. Abraham Quintanilla was especially vocal in his opposition, strongly rejecting the project and calling it misleading. In his view, allowing that perspective into the public space distorted Selena's memory and gave attention to someone who had caused irreversible harm. But others argued that documenting every angle of history, even the uncomfortable ones, was part of understanding the full truth. And so Selena's legacy became something unusual, not just a memory, but an ongoing discussion. A story that continues to be rewritten, reinterpreted, and re-examined with every new generation. Even commercial collaborations added to this tension. Her name and image continued to drive massive demand. From makeup collections that sold out in hours to renewed interest in her music and decades after her passing. Each release reminded the world that Selena was not just remembered. She was still actively shaping culture. But with every tribute, every adaptation, and every retelling, the same question kept returning louder than before. Who truly owns Selena Quintanilla's story? Her family, who lived it from the inside, or the public, who never stopped consuming it from the outside? And as more voices entered the conversation, more versions of her life emerged, sometimes aligned, sometimes conflicting, sometimes even contradictory, until one final question began to surface, one that no documentary, film, or interview has ever fully answered. When a legacy becomes this contested, this emotional, and this powerful, where does truth actually end and interpretation begin? Because in Selena's case, the story didn't just survive her, it evolved into something no one could fully control anymore. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. Click the next video on screen for more.